Hey guys, how's it going? Michael Troy here. Today we have a fun and interesting kind of different thing. I have a Don Simpson interview coming up in the next couple of weeks. We're going to follow up on my retro series of covering amazing Megaton Man issues 1 through 10, plus the Megaton Man mini-series 1 through 3 of Megaton Man Returns, plus Yarn Man one-shot, and also the Justice Machine one-shot. Plus, we're going to be talking about his upcoming 1963 comic that looms ever closer. The cover has been finished, looks amazing. I promised I was going to put a preview of that, and I totally forgot. So we'll save it for the interview with Don. I'll try to work in some preview art, some other fun projects he's working on. Like I have been touting the entire reason I am doing this whole series. It is the freaking year of Don Simpson, 2023. The much awaited, if not from Don himself, and becoming controversial from what I understand. It actually has been kind of controversial, but basically, for those of you who know, you know. And if you don't know, Don is working on or finished rather, working on finishing it up, the long anticipated 1963 annual. It's pretty audacious that Don is working on it, but he does have a little skin in the game. He lettered the initial series and has a sordid past with Alan Moore. So, anyway. So what we were looking at today, this fell sort of around the time that the Megaton Man Return series came out. And it's an interview with the great Amazing Heroes magazine. I love this magazine. Look at this gorgeous original Megaton Man cover. So cool. Don Simpson, of course. So here's an interview catching up with Don Simpson, originally appearing in number 147, August 15th, 1988, $2.95. Woo, look at that gorgeous Don Simpson lettering. I love this art so much. The Return of Megaton Man, Simpson Speaks Out. Okay, so this is the time of the Megaton Man series. So it's pretty timely that I'm covering this right now. And rather just talk about what they said in the interview. As crazy as it sounds, I'm just going to read it to you. So brace yourselves. This is something to just, I don't know, listen to while you're reading, or not reading, but drawing, or, I don't know, cooking, or doing something that doesn't take away your attention from my ASMR lulling, soothing voice. And I'm going to read this to you right now. Okay, so here we go. This great interview. It is hysterical. I'm going to refrain from making too much commentary to get through it, but it speaks for itself. It's fantastic. It really shows a lot of the state of the industry and stuff like that, and Don's trials and tribulations with self-publishing. So here we go, a glimpse into the past, y'all. This interview from 1988 with Don Simpson for Amazing Heroes magazine. Woo is correct, Megaton Man. All right, the original Golden Age Don Simpson interview. Golly, that crazy gizmo really works. That is the Golden Age Megaton Man. So amazing. I love him. And look at this gorgeous sketch from Don Simpson. I love seeing the prelim and sketch art here. By Tom Powers. This summer, Don Simpson's Megaton Man returns in a new miniseries, almost 2 years since the first Megaton Man series ended with issue 10. At that time, Simpson brought his Border Worlds feature out from the back of Megaton Man and into its own black and white comic, which he discussed in Amazing Heroes 94. He also moved from his then-current residence at the Kitchen Sink Barn in the backwoods of Princeton, Wisconsin, to Los Angeles. Unfortunately, neither the sales of the new comic debuting in the black and white bust, or the new city turned out well for Don. So in late '86, he fled to Pittsburgh, the closest thing he could find to his native home, Detroit, without being Detroit, and he started looking for freelance work to supplement his declining income. The extra work he found included penciling an issue of Justice Machine for Kamiko, inking an issue of Mr. Monster, and most importantly for his solvency, an artist slot in DC's horror anthology Wasteland. He also picked up the more personally rewarding assignments of drawing 2 anecdotes for Harvey Picar's American Splendor 13, illustrating a story by John Woolley for Kitchen Sink's Death Rattle, and collaborating with his good friend Larry Beanworld Martyr for Ripoff Comics number 17. In this interview, Don, with his characteristic Woody Allen-like despair, speaks openly on work for hire, the lost paradise of direct sales, struggling to publish low-selling comics, petulant superstar comic book artists, and much more. This little chat was conducted, transcribed, and edited by Comics Journal staffer and fellow Detroit immigrant Tom Powers. Amazing Heroes. So, have you returned to Megaton Man? So, why have you returned to Megaton Man? Simpson. This miniseries started in January of '87. I was still working on Border Worlds. And I wasn't sure what format it would take. I was thinking of a long story or a double-sized issue or something like that, and I had no deadline. I was doing it just as relief from doing Border Worlds. The two things are so different that going from one to another was a good break. The only problem, of course, is that Border Worlds kept dropping in sales to the point where I had to take on freelance work. I did an issue of Justice Machine and inked a Mr. Monster. Then I got roped into Wastelands at DC. All these things just tended to take its toll on Border Worlds in terms of my attention to it. And by the time of issue 7, I felt that I was just being distracted to the point that I was worried I was going to hurt the quality of the book. Actually, I think steadily the series kept getting better. If anything, it was getting much stronger and I was getting deeper into it. That was the problem. I wanted to be fully absorbed with it, but out of necessity, I had to juggle different things, which doesn't make for a peace of mind. So by the time I suspended Border Worlds, everyone told me that by suspending it, I was in effect canceling it. Of course, I had every intention of returning to it as soon as possible. I was treating the freelance stuff as stopgap measure stuff to do to get back on track and wait for the market to return. In the meantime, I was still doing bits and pieces of the Megaton Man miniseries, and it was growing closer to being finished. Amazing Heroes. On Border Worlds, which you said you thought was getting better with every issue, what elements did you think were improving? Simpson. Well, I was learning more about characterization, about form and pacing. There was a lot of experimenting with Border Worlds, from the backup feature in the last few issues of Megaton Man to the black and white book. I was learning to draw in black and white, which is a lot different from relying on color, so I was experimenting with silhouettes, a lot of black. By the 7th issue, I was using duo shade, craft tint, which is probably associated with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles more than anything else. Overall, I think I was getting Border Worlds down. In the 6th and 7th issues, there were more panels to a page. One of the complaints I heard a lot was especially on the early issues, which I had a lot of double page splashes. It seemed like when you read an issue, not a lot had been accomplished. I think by the later issues, things were beginning to move and pay off. Amazing Heroes. Why don't we talk about the DC material you're doing? How did you get those jobs? Simpson. Well, I was asking around for freelance, and I called DC and talked to Richard Bruning, DC's art director, because he gave me his business card at a convention. This was about a year after I met him. Of course, he's from Wisconsin, close to Kitchen Sink, and he was affiliated with Capital City and so forth. Anyway, he's always been complimentary about Megaton Man, so I called him up and asked him how to get freelance work. I figured he had some position of responsibility because he was the art director. He gave me the song and dance you'd give every 17-year-old that would happen to get the DC phone number. He told me to make Xeroxes and send samples off of their characters and send them all to the different editors, and if possible, visit the offices and shake hands and stuff like this. And I felt pretty much like my 15 or 16 comic books that I had done had not really amounted to much as far as a professional standing. So I was a bit disappointed by the phone call. Later, I called Diana Schutz at Comico and got, Comico, mind you, and got a Justice Machine story almost right away. I said, do I need to draw samples of this? And he said, no, she just had to clear it with Mike Gustovich. I suppose that's a good indication of the difference between DC and Kamiko. In the meantime, Bill Lobes had been contacted by Mike Gold for this Wasteland thing, which is a horror anthology. Amazing Heroes, a horror anthology? Question mark. Simpson chuckles. No, well, it's not for me to say. The idea was that there'd be 4 rotating artists doing 9-page stories and covers. So Bill suggested me. So one day I get this call from Mike Gold, who asks, how would you like to do 12 issues of this? At the time, 12 issues seemed like forever, but of course I'm doing the 12th issue right now. At the time, I felt sort of awkward making that commitment when I still had hopes of keeping Border Worlds going. Nonetheless, I agreed to it and started turning in the DC vouchers and making DC money, which is like no comparison to anything I made before. My basic problem, this is just my problem freelancing as opposed to doing my own stuff. They're like 2 different careers. Of course, on one hand, I'm using ideas that I come up with myself, and it's very personal. There's no problem working up enthusiasm for an idea that I've come up with, as far as sitting down and drawing it. But with something you get in the mail, whether it's Mr. Monster or some DC script, obviously there are ideas that you somehow have to find sympathy with. It's sort of like being a method actor. You have to hopefully find some material that you can empathize with, or else just fake it. And that has been the big challenge with Wasteland, because sometimes I'm not really in sympathy with what the story is trying to say, if it is indeed saying anything. But I think especially the later ones have been a little more humorous and a little more palatable for me to do. Amazing Heroes. Well, it seems in talking to you over the past year that you've had numerous mood swings about doing freelance work. Simpson. Well, I've developed the ability, or broken down the barrier or something, where I can take a script and get it to just to the extent of doing a thorough job on the artwork. This is not an enthusiastic endorsement for that kind of system. But like I said, I've certainly done a lot better at being a freelancer than I thought. Part of the reason I've had mood swings is that I feel it's a temporary thing which I can do enough of to survive until everyone realizes how wonderful Border Worlds is and start buying that. I've more or less adopted the attitude that the direct sales market isn't the fulfillment of the independent comics dream. I've been an independent cartoonist for more than 3 years. I've done my own projects, I've named my own projects, and I've had total freedom at Kitchen Sink. I've always tried to go along with doing advance covers and doing the promotion and showing up at conventions, not really with any particular enthusiasm for being there in some cases. And I've played this whole game where you try to keep down the swear words and avoid the sex, and you try to put out a consistent product every 60 days, and there's really no payoff for that. I've often remarked to Dennis Kitchen, why don't I just do something like First Kingdom that comes out once every couple of years, just when I feel like it? And Dennis, of course, turns white, says, well, no, Don, of course you can't do that. That's like the undergrounds. I don't know, he got southern all of a sudden, sorry. What would the readership come to expect? You can't just leave your readers hanging. You have to do this and do that. Well, that becomes unbearable when your whole life is dominated by 7,300 readers. For all the creative freedom that I have enjoyed at Kitchen Sink, which is pretty great, there's just this sense of being enslaved to the direct sales market, whether you're doing a comic book that you own entirely yourself or whether you have to listen to Cat Ironwood or something. Ever since the black and white cave-in, there certainly hasn't been the financial security that one would desire in a profession in the direct sales market. My own feeling is that the stuff I do myself, the stuff I do with Kitchen Sink, or for Anything Goes, or for Harvey Picard, or whatever, those kind of things are labors of love, which tend to fall in the category of things you do after you've made enough money to survive on for a month. The direction I feel I'm going in is that I'm going to have to do things on the side, which is to say either dig ditches or do DC Comics or something else to make a living, to ensure that I have a roof over my head and a studio and can pay the rent and electricity and so forth. Then, if I could do an issue of Border Worlds once a year, that would be a pretty good thing, all things considered. Amazing Heroes. Well, which is more preferable? Digging ditches or doing DC Comics? Simpson. Laughter. I don't know. I tell you, I think Wasteland definitely lives up to its name. I understand it's at the bottom of DC's sales figures, which probably means it's a labor of love for somebody at DC. I certainly can't say that for myself. Amazing Heroes. It seems like you've really adopted a cynical attitude about doing work for hire to pay the bills and a nihilistic attitude about the direct sales market ever being able to support independent comics. Simpson, a realistic attitude? Amazing Heroes. No, nihilistic, as in raw. Simpson, well, the other thing that you haven't brought up is that I've returned to art school, which I started last fall at about the depth of my mood swing. Part of the reason I decided to go back to art school was that I felt trapped in comics, meaning that I couldn't make a living doing what I wanted. The biggest job opportunity in comics is to draw superheroes and fight scenes and so forth, and I didn't like that option. Art school has given me the feeling, if nothing else, that there's a bigger world out there, and I've been doing watercolor and airbrush and photography, learning different techniques and finding different purposes for my skills. The idea, ultimately, is that I'll have the possibility to step into commercial art or whatever. If you're willing to sell out, there's much more effective ways of selling out than drawing the X-Men. You can make much better money airbrushing and retouching and doing storyboards and things like that. Amazing Heroes. Maybe you could recolor old films. Simpson. Yeah, you know, anything. What the hell? Laughter. Which is not to say I'll follow that path. The likelihood I'll spend the rest of my life being miserable in comics is pretty high, but at least there's potentials for other things, and I don't feel trapped by Steve Jeppy or whatever fad or craze is sweeping the direct sales market. Amazing Heroes. How did you get your assignment from Harvey Picard? Simpson. I bugged the hell out of him for several months. I met him in San Diego in '86, and I'd read his comics, American Splatter. My friend, Mike Kazala, the creator of Captain Jack, had gotten a hold of them, mostly because of Crumb, of course. I read a few of them around '82, and I wasn't really impressed. It seemed sort of dry and depressing. Particularly, it seemed sort of vain and egotistical to be completely drawing from your own life. I was reading Henry Miller at the time, which is much heavier than American Splendor. Much more sensationalistic, much dirtier. I guess I would have liked to see American Splendor a little different at that point. Anyway, it had been several years, and he was talking on a panel in San Diego, and he gave this speech, reprinted in Comics Journal 123 Kids, on the potential of comics, with all sorts of history and stuff, and I was really impressed with his understanding of comics. My perception of him being self-centered was erroneous. So we traded comics, and after the convention, I was reading his work with new eyes, and I got the paperback and so forth, and I started writing him and bugging him for work. And in the meantime, of course, he was appearing on David Letterman. It was the next summer in Chicago when I really pressed him for a story, so he promised to get me something. Now, I would think that somebody in comics who got on David Letterman would have artists lined up around the block, but he's had just the same old troubles with getting reliable people. I was doing it just to say I had worked with Harvey Picard. He's still working, by and large, with the same group of artists that he's developed over the years. It's just incredible. It's not like he pays a lot, but the guy's has had 2 paperbacks, and he's a national folk hero. But nonetheless, he's had tremendous problems with artists when they commit to something to get them to follow through. To me, that's amazing. Apparently, there's just no level of success in this industry high enough to guarantee a comfortable position. You're always having to face frustration and work your ass off. As far as my one-page contribution to American Splendor is concerned, it's about a couple of janitors in an office. There's sort of an obvious Crumb influence in the brushwork, but Harvey was pleased with it. I got my initial $60, which is the standard American Splendor work-for-hire page rate, but he turned around and sold it to the Cleveland Plain dealer for $200. That was my part of it, and he sold it to National Lampoon, which is a sleazy magazine nowadays, by the way. I couldn't believe it. I looked at one, and it's on cheaper paper, and it's got all these X-rated video ads and stuff. Amazing Heroes, and Fantagraphic ads. Simpson, well, that's pretty much the same thing. But I got another $200 for that. So for this one page, I got $260, which is the highest page rate I've ever earned on anything. Well, speaking about Amazing Heroes, forgive me. Well, speaking about the Crumb influence you showed in that work, and I also noticed in your Marvel tryout pages a distinct Kirby look. Then, of course, there's the infamous Comics Journal number 115, kids, cover you did, in which you mimicked various styles throughout the entire industry. um, Simpson, as far as that cover is concerned, I particularly remember when reading the Howard Chaykin interview in the Journal, he talks about Rick Geary and Crumb, Mouse, and stuff like that, but as being totally separate from his conception of comics. He had a very ironclad view of the industry. It's amazing to me that he'd have this very schizophrenic view of comics. I pretty much absorbed all this stuff at the same time. From 1972 to 77, I read Marvels. Then after that, Eisner, Mobius, Crumb, Moscoso, Spiegelman, and Wood. All of those influences I absorbed at the same time. So I can't think of that in those terms, that what some New York publisher will pay for constitutes a comic book. My tastes are just about as eclectic as anybody I know. I like yummy fur, and I can also appreciate old Sterankos and Kirby's and things like that. That the journal cover and things like that. That journal cover was the first time I actually sat down and swiped different styles, and I was quite an education. It was the first time I did, the first thing I did when I moved into my apartment here in Pittsburgh, and it took 2 weeks straight. By the end of it, I had all these books and comics and European albums all over, sorry, all over the floor. I used pen, brush, rapidograph, whatever it took. The only other time I used reference was for Jerry Lewis's Face or Orson Welles, things like that. It was an enormous education and a real guilty pleasure to do that cover. 2 weeks went by like nothing. As far as the Crumb influence on American Splendor, it just seemed like appropriate. Like appropriate, the house style. I think the second thing I did for Harvey is a lot more natural for me. A wide variety of artists have drawn Harvey, so it's sort of intimidating when you enter that crowd. It was funny how Harvey called me up and gave me that one-page script over the phone, and I imagined how it should look and thought in terms of what I'd seen before. To me, Crumb just seems to be the ideal artist, and that's why it came out that way. Aside from that, for me, the most influential comic of 1987 was Crumb's Hup #2. I keep pulling that out and looking at it time and time again. For one thing, he's just completely mastered the brush in a very short amount of time. So it's just a revelation that he suddenly became the preeminent master of the sable brush in just a couple issues of Weirdo. That had a real impact on me, not to mention the quality of his vision and his stories right now. My Trouble with Women, Part 2, and The Devil Girl, and If I Were a King. He just seems to be at the peak of his powers and getting better all the time. So that was dominating my thoughts. I think you'll see in this story in Ripoff #7, that story I did with Larry Martyr shows a real kind of underground brushstroke to it. Amazing Heroes. Well, with Crumb being such a major influence, I wonder if you see yourself in the same field of comics as he's in. Would you differentiate between the paths you followed from where Crumb has gone? Simpson. Well, the main difference, of course, is that I grew up on superhero comics, which is pretty difficult influence to shake. Witness 13 issues of Megaton Man. Amazing Heroes. Why do you think that after getting dosages of Zap in European comics, the superhero influences still shine through? Simpson. Well, I certainly have a tendency to idealize the figure, going for more dramatic, melodramatic, or fantastic settings. That's true of even Border Worlds. Harvey kept warning me not to idealize the figures. Make them wrinkly and human and unkempt and grungy and so forth. But my own natural tendency is to go towards graceful, beautiful figures. And that, I guess, is my attraction to superhero comics. Not to say that all superhero comics are good, but when they are good, they're usually built around strong anatomy and figure drawing, and gesture. Certainly Bern Hogarth was an early influence on my learning anatomy. John Buscema, too. Jack Kirby. A lot has been made about his abstract, exaggerated figures, but he could really draw. There's a strong sense of structure to his figures, and his anatomy is not as nearly as inaccurate as a lot of people would assume. I'm also attracted to Milo Manera, just for the sake of his seductive line work and women and so forth, and Wally Wood and Mobius, Bilal. But the tradition of the nude figure surfaces in comics unchanged. Basically, Superman and Spider-Man and whoever these leaping figures, nude figures with boot lines. They could be Olympic athletes. It's very clear that the same kind of strained figures and dynamic movement in the human body that we find in the Greeks or in the Renaissance is the basic appeal of superhero comics, which in some way brings us back to Megaton Man. Oh, Amazing Heroes, sorry. Which in some way brings us back to Megaton Man. Talk about that some more since it's on the cover. Simpson. I think probably my earliest experience with this kind of material that I now associate with comics came from the old George Reeves Superman reruns on TV. I used to watch those. And I'd pin a towel to my sweatshirt and roll it up and wear another sweatshirt over that, which would create this disturbing hunchback effect. I must have been 6 or so. My mother would be doing dishes and she would play Lois Lane. So I would stroll through the kitchen and I would be Clark Kent, and I'd say, "Hi, Lois." And of course, she wouldn't ever turn to see who was talking to. So sometimes she would mistakenly call me Superman. And I would say, no, I'm Clark. And she'd say, "That's what I meant." Or if I was Superman, I'd say, "Hello, Lois." And she'd say, "Hi, Clark." And then I'd have to correct her. Later on, the Adam West Batman show came on, and I became Batman. And for 3 consecutive Halloweens, I was Superman, Batman, and Robin. This is an early part of my flight from reality. My preparation for manhood, I suppose, preparing for the real adult world by dressing up in strange costumes and asking for free candy, which isn't too much different from the way I am today. This was my earliest fascination with the superhero genre, and it sort of forms the basis for Megaton Man. Trent Flug is just pretending to be a multifaceted character with secret identities and stuff, and he thinks he's fooling people. And this goes beyond parodying anything specific. Especially this miniseries comes from recollections of myself as a kid playing different characters. It's a surprising thing. At the end of the first 10-issue run of Megaton Man, I was set to abandon the character forever. So I went to the extent of turning Megaton Man into a normal human. When I got more ideas for Megaton Man, I realized this ordinary person looked a lot like me. The miniseries opens with Trent Flug in Ann Arbor, and Stella, the former see-through girl, is pregnant with this child, and one of her roommates is Pammy, who is this thin, flat-chested, vaguely Jewish intellectual who Trent Flug is infatuated with. Then there's Clarissa, who's sort of like Lisa Bonet. This is where the miniseries starts. Amazing Heroes. Didn't you tell me that one of your original plot ideas for the series was a satire of Marvel and their treatment of artists, and Jack Kirby in particular? Simpson. Well, the plotline involves Megaton Man being brought back, and he doesn't know why he's been brought back, other than by popular demand. So he has to find out who brought him back, and a series of ridiculous events lead to Megaton Man discovering his origins. Of course, bad guy is behind everything, and Bad Guy owns the comic book company called the Gamble Entertainment Corporation, which employs this huge room full of people at drawing tables cranking out the adventures of Megaton Man. So there's indeed a financial necessity for Megaton Man to live. Megaton Man flies in the window and sees all this, and at first he's sort of touched by it because they're writing about him and chronicling his life. But he looks over his shoulder of one of the artists and sees how personal they're getting and how invasive they are. There were so many ridiculous things in the last couple years about taking the Hulk back to his origins, doing the definitive Superman. It's It's like these characters really exist. But the only reason they are called into existence is for the need of the shareholders and the accountants and the lawyers. Sometimes genuinely talented craftsmen are called upon and given lots of money to perpetuate these characters, and sometimes we can sit back and talk about the sociological interpretations of the Swamp Thing. But it comes right down to the fact that it's a pretty cynical system that produces our superheroes. So anyway, Megaton Man becomes really appalled at this sweatshop full of people cranking out his stories, and he decides to quit. He announces that he's going to leave, thereby freeing all the workers, the artists, he announces that he's going to leave, thereby freeing all the workers, the artists, pencilers, writers, and editors, and so forth. And far from being delighted, the rank and file turns on Megaton Man because they have car payments to make, and they're not too thrilled that Megaton Man doesn't want to be exploited anymore. Amazing hero. Speaking of rank and file, the latest forum for comic book freelancers to air their views in the real world is WAP, the newsletter edited by Steve Gerber, Stephen Grant, and Frank Miller. Writer, or no, I don't even know. Like, I know what WAP stands for in this generation, but I don't know what it stands for here, and it doesn't say. Anyway, so the newsletter edited by Steve Gerber, Stephen Grant, and Frank Miller, and as far as we speak, the first issue has just been released. Maybe you can be one of the first professionals to comment in public about that. Simpson, well, I was not sent WAP, probably because they don't have my address, but I got a bootleg copy and wasn't too impressed with it. It just sounds like a lot of rich people who have made a lot of money at Marvel and DC complaining that they have to work for Marvel and DC. One way to get frustrated in any situation is to have an unrealistic expectation from that situation. I think the guys that produce WAP have really unrealistic expectations of the marketplace or of their situation as hired hands. The tendency for superstar creators is to get real proprietary of whatever character that they've earned the trust of the companies to give them. You know, whether or not Catwoman is a prostitute is an essential part of Frank Miller's vision or not is really sort of minor compared to Warner Communications' need to make money at whatever. I think the tremendous artistic achievements of The Dark Knight are really overblown when you consider. To me, it's amazing how DC has gained mileage from Dark Knight by being portrayed as taking such incredible artistic risks and entrusting Batman to Miller. I mean, Frank only had to work in the industry for 10 years and gain a reputation for doing bleak, urban, psychotic, incoherent superhero stories before getting his hand on Batman. Gee, Frank, do anything you want with Batman. Guess what? It's a bleak, psychotic, urban nightmare, vaguely coherent, and that's saying a lot. Is this a big surprise? When you're dealing with a classic work that has stood the test of times. I just realized the ad on this page. Are we serious? Anyway, I'm not even going to say what it says. Okay. When you're dealing with a classic work that has stood the test of time, say Shakespeare or Sophocles, and you talk about reinterpreting that work on the stage, there's some sense to that. But when you're talking about turning Frank Miller loose on some dopey old comic strip that has outlasted its usefulness, it tends to be sort of a disgrace to what we call artistic discourse. Turning Howard Chaykin loose on Blackhawk, that really, really produced unexpected results, didn't it? Laughter. I view WAP as this expression of unhappiness by these guys who are trapped at the top. I really don't feel sorry for them. I invite them to start drawing in a sketchbook, or they can publish something that sells 6,000 copies. They can be as creatively free as they want. And that is some savage speak from Don Simpson. Some more beautiful sketch art up here. What did you all think of that? Oh my God, wasn't that kind of crazy? Fun, insightful, quintessential Don Simpson. Anyway, coming soon, interview, perhaps the real live interview with me and Don, perhaps next week. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for being a part of Megaton Man Mondays, one of my favorite features on my channel. Anyways, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Hit that like button, and I'll bring you guys more later. Thanks. Bye, guys.